Hi, this is Kelsey Fukowski for AP Gov Review. In Unit 4, Part 2 of our discussion on Congress, we're going to be looking at Congress and elections as well as some of the prestigious committees in Congress today. So let's first start off with congressional elections. Who wins elections? And if you say incumbents, you are undoubtedly correct. Incumbents, meaning those who already hold office, when they seek re-election, tend to have a very, very high probability of winning. As we discussed in Unit 3 on our small chapter dealing with elections, you saw this chart before that House incumbents tend to have about over a 90% chance of being reelected, whereas the Senate, while not as high, still for the most part hovers around the mid 80% on average, although sometimes a little bit less than that, around 55%, as you saw in the 1980 election. But overall, tends to stay above 80%, a little bit tougher in the Senate. But, definitely you do have the incumbency factor on one's side. All right, so don't get stressed out by this slide, but one of the reasons why incumbents win so often, it's because they have so many advantages on their side. Let's first start off with credit claiming. So anytime that a congressperson or a senator can take credit in a home state or district for grants in terms of money for projects, let's say for roads or programs, which is collectively known as pork barrel when money is allocated to your district or state, certainly you're going to take that credit. You also have something that's unique to congressmen, that being constituent services or casework, that they provide constituents with information and assistance. So let's say somebody's not getting their Social Security check, you would call your local congressperson, and that congressperson would then help you get that check as needed. Of course, they love to do casework as it connects that person, that politician, with the voters. In addition, there's something called franking privileges, where the politician, specifically in Congress, can provide constituents with information that is about bills that that person had supported, or basically dealing with credit claiming, as we talked about earlier. And the congressperson does not have to pay a dime. It is actually subsidized by the government. So it's actually a free way of advertising some of the great things, and I put that in quotes, potentially, that that congressperson has done. Another reason being is that with gerrymandering, there are districts, as we talked about in Unit 3 of elections, in which you have these uniquely shaped districts that tend to favor the incumbents most of the time. Remember, this is only for the House elections because House elections have specific districts where, of course, the Senate, every state gets 2 senators. So with gerrymandering, which is done by the state legislatures, typically they will carve out a district that will favor the incumbent of that particular party. So that also really helps the congressperson get reelected term after term. Presidential coattails, not as prominent as it once used to be, but back in previous decades, let's say 1960s, 1970s, this is when voters supported congressional candidates because of their support for the president. Not very likely today. We talked about ticket splitting in earlier videos, and we see that the presidential coattail effect does not work as much. Also, with incumbent advantages, deal with weaker opponents, especially in congressional elections where they're less known, they're more inexperienced, so they don't have as much notoriety. And in addition to that, you have the sophomore surge. So once that person has already served one term in Congress and you're running again, you have an increase in votes for a congressional candidate that they received in their first bid for re-election. So it actually is known as the sophomore surge as they do better because their name gets more recognition, of course, as well. Campaign spending, well, typically if you're a PAC, you're going to most likely support the incumbent because remember, the incumbent has all these advantages already, and as a result, they tend to outspend their opponents 12-1. Not to mention, too, that midterm elections for Congress people tend to be during midterm elections where you have lower turnout. So as a result, that all of this together certainly helps incumbents. Now, the advantages, as we just talked about, franking privileges, you want to be very visible to your candidate or your constituents, rather. You can also take frequent trips home, use of newsletter technology, especially with high-tech politics, with Twitter, Facebook. Those are certainly things that they're going to take advantage of. And as we said earlier, with credit claiming from casework, and also securing money for projects, grants in the form of pork barrel certainly can help one in a congressional election. Now, the advantages, again, continuing with incumbents, position taking, they're certainly going to portray themselves as hardworking, dedicated individuals. You will occasionally see a partisan stand on an issue that's more controversial and more meaningful to a particular district. They tend to have weaker opponents, as we said, tend to be underfunded, and money, of course, goes a long way. With media exposure, you have more name recognition, which is one of the reasons why you do have the sophomore surge for incumbents. And again, as just to reiterate, campaign spending certainly helps because PACs will give most of their money to an incumbent. So as a result, you're much more likely as an incumbent to win as opposed to an opponent. Now, how would you take down an incumbent? It's a little bit harder to do, but it's not necessarily impossible. But nevertheless, for defeating an incumbent, typically there's only a couple of ways. First, if they're tarnished by scandal or corruption, a good example of this would be Congressman Anthony Weiner, who was embroiled in scandal and was forced to resign. So that gives newcomers a better chance of winning. Redistricting, because that has to be done as a result of gerrymandering, can weaken the incumbency advantage, especially if a state is losing a district. So as a result, that can be very problematic, or if the political party in the state legislature changes, typically right after the census is taken. That can happen as a result, and you could lose your advantage of gerrymandering. You can also have a major political tidal wave. So sometimes there's a very big anti-incumbent movement. Sometimes there's a big movement against a particular political party that's been in reign for a few years, and that can certainly lead to the downfall of an incumbent. But really the best way for a person to defeat an incumbent is through an open seat. Certainly you're going to have more competition, but most turnover does occur in open seats, not necessarily scandals. So as a result, there you see your greatest chances there. Now, stability and change. Incumbents do provide stability in Congress. That is a very good thing, so you don't necessarily have a revolving door. It does change less frequently through elections, especially in the House. You do see a little bit higher turnover in the Senate. Some people have raised the question that there should be term limits, like the president. However, there are no term limits, so if you are a senator or a member of the House of Representatives, you can run as many times as you'd like, and as long as you stay alive. Okay, so let's shift gears from elections to committees. A lot of people don't really know what committees do. Committees are really where most of the real work occurs with respect to legislation, where they're going to analyze it, where most of the bills fail in this process. They are also important in conducting investigations, especially on the executive branch on an as-needed basis. They also are engaged in legislative oversight, where they will, again, exercise oversight over the executive branch agencies, from the Department of Homeland Security, let's say, to the Department of Health and Human Services, and this is on an ongoing basis. So there are four types of committees. The first one being a standing committee. This is a permanent committee, and this is subject matter committees that handle bills in many policy areas. So this is where you sort of get your experts and you're going to put them on the standing committees. And certainly there are some standing committees that are going to be much more prominent. For example, the Judiciary Committee, that's going to be much more prominent than, let's say, the Aging Committee. Where the Aging Committee, how much power and how much notoriety does that really have? In addition, you have the joint committees. Those are a few subject matter areas, from printing and economic, where you have membership from both the House and the Senate together. And then you have conference committees, and when you go over the process of how a bill becomes a law, right before it gets sent over to the president, you have the House bill and the Senate bill being merged and hammered out between the two different versions for one bill. So that's in the process of a bill. And then when you have a select committee, those are created for specific purposes, such as the Watergate investigation. These are temporary committees, unlike standing committees, which are permanent. So let's go a little bit more in depth with standing committees. They are permanent committees, so it deals with legislative issues, investigative issues, and oversight issues. And some committees are very prestigious, and one of the reasons they are called standing committees is because they stand for a very long time. There are various types. You have authorizing, allowing for the creation of new federal programs, appropriations, which deals with fundings for the program, and then also you have revenue and budget, which raises money for federal programs. Now, you need to know some of the major standing committees for the AP Gov exam. The first one, the most important, I would say, standing committee in the House is the Rules Committee, And that is important because it sets all the legislative rules, establishes rules for debate, it allows for amendments, it sets the legislative calendar, and it's basically I think the best analogy of this or metaphor would be that it is the traffic cop for House legislation. If you want a bill to go through, you can do that. If you don't, you can stop it or you can expedite it, depending if you are in the majority party. Also, the Ways and Means Committee, dealing with taxation, anything with taxation, very prominent. So the Ways and Means, and again, this is only particular to the House committee, so make sure you're not getting this confused with the Senate. This only deals with the House. And then appropriations deals with spending bills, authorization, as we just talked about, as well as appropriations. And remember that any tax bill has to start within the House of Representatives. That's very unique to the House of Representatives. So if you are on any of these three major committees, that is, again, very, very prestigious. Definitely know these three standing committees for the House. Let's contrast this now with the Senate. Finance Committee, dealing with tax bills, although the bill will not originate in the Senate, it will eventually make its way to the Senate. Appropriations, anything with spending, again, very important. Foreign Relations, yes, very, very big role here for the Senate because, remember, they have the power of ratification of a treaty as well as confirming ambassadors. So that's very, very important, foreign relations, as well as the Judiciary Committee, which is going to screen and basically vet judicial nominees. They give them very careful scrutiny because, as you hopefully should know, that the federal judges are going to be serving for life. So as a result, you want to make sure that that particular person is qualified. Keep in mind that there is no Rules Committee in the Senate. Party leaders are going to set the schedules. So these are the major ones here. I would say probably Foreign Relations and Judiciary, probably the most prominent of the Senate, but definitely be aware of these major standing committees. So if you look at some of the major standing committees in the Senate and the House, Senate, you have everything from appropriations, the foreign relations, health, education, labor, and pensions, veterans affairs, small business and entrepreneurship. So you see that some are a little bit more prestigious, others not so much. As I said earlier, maybe if you are in the House Committee for Aging or Small Business or Standards of Official Conduct, it's probably not the most, notable committee to be on. You probably would want to be on the Ways and Means since it's dealing with taxation or rules. Those tend to have the most power. And as we talked about before with the conference committees, these are where you're going to reconcile the House and the Senate bills together. They are temporary and they allow for language to be hashed out on a bill prior to going to the president. Now, some committees are more powerful and prestigious, as we said. Better committees increase your chance of reelection and money, because if you have a better committee, you might be able to secure more funding, more pork barrel, if you will, for your particular district. So members are assigned either by the Committee on Committees by the Republican Party or the Steering and Policy Committee by the Democratic Party. And again, if you show more greater party loyalty, the chances are you're going to have a better chance of serving on that committee. Now, the committee chairman is going to be the majority party person, and the ranking member is going to be of the minority party. So if you were let's say Republicans had the majority in the Senate, that means all the Senate committees will have a committee chairman who belongs to the Republican Party and a ranking member of the Democratic Party, and vice versa. Okay, let's end with a review question. A lot was thrown at you, but let's look at this particular question. So which of the following is a primary function of the Senate Judiciary Committee? Take a moment to look over the responses. All right, and if you said choice C, conducting hearings on judicial appointments made by the president, you are correct.